In my last video, I covered the Falcon Lake incident, and I called it the dumbest UFO story ever. Well, apparently, I was wrong, because this one is somehow even worse. Now, in case you haven't heard about the Maury Island incident before, it supposedly happened 2 weeks before the big Roswell one, right at the peak of the Summer of Saucers craze that was spreading across America at the time. And it's quite honestly amazing how 90% of UFO reports occur in America and 90% of crop circle reports occur in southern England, and like basically 0% of either occur here in South Africa. So I often wonder, why don't aliens visit us? What's wrong with South Africa? Quite a bit actually. Maybe the aliens don't want to get hijacked. Fair enough. But this Maury Island UFO story is said to be one of the most compelling UFO stories ever told. And every time I read the word compelling at the start of a story, I am immediately suspicious. It's like scammers from Nigeria who overuse the word kindly. Kindly send me all your money. Kindly believe my compelling UFO story. Well, anyway, what happened? Probably nothing. But I'll tell you what Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman said happened. Now, according to New Space Economy, the story begins with Harold A. Dahl, who claimed to be a harbor patrolman, though his actual role is debated. Some sources suggest he was actually salvaging logs. And as is of course tradition, we are literally one sentence into the story, and there is already contention. Was Dahl working that day, or was he just salvaging logs? Who knows? Who gives a shit? I do. Get your fucking story straight. So apparently, on June 21st, 1947, Harold Dahl was on a boat with his son Charles, the family dog, and a two-man crew somewhere near Maury Island in Puget Sound, Washington. According to Harold Dahl, they then spotted 6 donut-shaped UFOs. Never heard of a donut-shaped one, so I'm kind of excited to see where this goes. However, what's not as exciting is that we are now literally 3 sentences into the story, and we are already at our second point of contention. Because some reports say that they went back to shore, and some reports say that they stayed on the boat on the water. So where exactly were they when this happened? Who knows? Who gives a shit? Obviously me, otherwise I probably wouldn't be recording this. Now, the important part of the story is that one of these 6 flying donuts appeared drunk or damaged and was wobbling as it slowly descended towards them, which is also something I've never heard before, so I am kind of excited to see where this is going. Harold Dahl then says he looked at them through binoculars and apparently took a bunch of photographs that have never been seen, as is of course tradition. But here comes the big claim of the story. The drunk or damaged donut came all the way over to them while they were either still on the boat or on the shore and decided that, yeah, this seems to be the perfect place for me to puke my guts out. This drunk UFO then apparently ejected a large quantity of a white, lightweight metallic slag, some of which hit the boat, some of which hit Dahl's son Charles and broke his arm. But how weak must Charles have been if this lightweight shit broke his arm? And some of the lightweight slag hit and killed the family dog, which I highly doubt is true because again, the white slag was apparently lightweight. Harold Dahl actually described it as looking like newspapers. Now, as upsetting as it is to hear this, even though it's a bunch of fucking bullshit, I cannot confirm if Harold Dahl was actually a harbor patrolman. I can't confirm what he did after this alleged incident happened, and I cannot even confirm if his son Charles' arm was really broken on this day, and I can't even confirm if they had a dog. But I'm gonna add an extra 10 cents anyway, just for putting us through this trauma. It's your job to protect your animals. I also need to point something out here. Isn't it weird how UFO sightings have evolved over the years? You never hear this kind of shit anymore. UFOs never eject things anymore, they don't fly in fleets anymore, they don't get damaged anymore, they don't even crash anymore. I mean, for fuck's sake, they don't even seem to land anymore, or even abduct people anymore. It's almost like these UFOs are evolving alongside our technological advancements and our references in pop culture and media. Isn't that weird? Anyway, back to business. Now, apparently, the day after the alleged sighting, Harold Dahl claimed to have been visited by a man dressed in a black suit driving a black 1947 Buick. Here's a fun fact for you. This is the very first time the Men in Black were ever reported in a UFO story. And as you know, the Men in Black would soon, of course, become a UFO tradition. And hey, you know what's actually a possibility? If Harold Dahl never made up this bullshit story, there's a possibility that we would have never gotten the Men in Black movies. So I'll take off one sin. Now apparently, Tommy Lee Jones warned Harold Dahl not to speak about this UFO or else. Or else what exactly? Because the story was publicized in 1947 and Harold Dahl died in 1982. So clearly, they didn't do anything to him. But according to Harold Dahl, the Man in Black knew details of the event that Dahl had not yet shared publicly, suggesting that he had inside information. Yeah, or this man who supposedly knew additional details never existed, and Dahl just claimed that a man dressed in black came and threatened him and his family if he ever spoke about the drunk UFO that blew chunks on him. What is more likely? Cause this Men in Black shit is so fucking ridiculous. Because if you think about it just for a second, and you ask yourself, how good were these supposed Men in Black at knowing things ahead of time? Because if authorities didn't even know that their own top secret military balloon, Project Mogul, crashed on Mac Brazel's ranch in Roswell, New Mexico, then how in the blue hell does this Man in Black have additional information about Dahl's drunk UFO? I mean, Roswell, the biggest UFO bullshit story in the world, doesn't have any Men in Black. Instead, Mac Brazel goes to the police station in town and says that there's some shit on my farm. And that is when the military come to clean it up. There were no Men in Black in the Roswell story, at least the original story. And speaking of original stories, I don't even know which version of the Maury Island incident is the original. There are so many different versions to the same story, and it's not even a very complicated story. Some donut puked up slag.
How stupid does that look, you fucking donut?
That's about it. But some versions of the story imply that Harold Dahl immediately collected some samples of the slag and took it to his supervisor, Fred Chrisman. However, the source that I'm prioritizing because they don't seem to be full of shit, New Space Economy, says that Harold Dahl then contacted Fred Chrisman, who is the person who came out and collected samples of the slag. So who collected the samples? Who knows? Who gives a shit? I don't even give a shit anymore. Because surely if this actually happened, it would not be this difficult to keep the story straight. So this story, for the moment at least, has the honor of being the worst UFO story that I have ever read. You know, and people don't even know who Fred Chrisman is exactly to Harold Dahl. Like I said, some reports say that he was Harold Dahl's supervisor, but some reports say that he could have been his partner in this log salvage operation. And the fact that this man is even in the story at all somehow makes the Maury Island incident even more unbelievable. If you read up about this fucking guy, you'll find out that he actually claimed in 1946 that he battled non-humans in a cave during World War II. Now fair enough, snakes and spiders are also non-humans, but he was almost certainly referring to aliens because in 1947, the same year this Maury Island bullshit didn't happen, Fred Chrisman tried to convince two people who thought they saw a UFO that lava rocks he picked up somewhere were in fact debris dropped from a flying saucer. So at least we now know where this idea that a drunk UFO puked metallic slag came from. Now also, it's probably important to mention that in 1968, Fred Chrisman would once again find himself in a very strange situation when he was subpoenaed by a district attorney who believed that he was involved in the JFK assassination. Now I'm not going to get into JFK conspiracies. This video is about a drunk UFO. However, some people believe that Fred Chrisman could have been one of the three vagrants who were photographed being escorted by police near the Texas School Book Depository shortly after the shooting. Some people believe that he could have been a grassy knoll gunman. And some people believe that Fred Chrisman was the guy that Clay Shaw called shortly after being arrested. Clay Shaw being the only person ever tried for allegedly conspiring to assassinate JFK. Now, Clay Shaw's charges were dropped, obviously, because the official conclusion is that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. Now, like I said, this video is not about JFK, so let's not speculate or discuss whether we agree with all of that or not. But I felt like it helps us understand who this Fred Chrisman guy is, since he's one of the guys that claimed a drunk UFO puked metallic slag onto a dog at Maury Island. Anyways, moving on. Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman then contacted a guy named Ray Palmer. Now, Ray Palmer was the editor of Amazing Stories magazine, a publication known for its science fiction content. And they contacted Ray Palmer instead of, contacting the vet to examine the dog, or contacting the hospital to look at his son's broken arm, or actually contacting the police to report that his son was now missing. Yeah, in some versions of the story, Harold's son Charles just disappears. So to figure out when the fuck that happened, we're gonna have to backtrack a little bit. In some versions of the story, it is reported that the man in black came and threatened Harold Dahl at his house, standing on his front doorstep. Can you imagine the nerve of this guy? Some reports say that Dahl and the man in black went to a nearby coffee shop, and the man in black told Dahl that he saw something he was not supposed to see. Which, assuming the men in black are real and are doing what these people are actually claiming that they do, like, I don't know, neutralizing people or threatening them or making them disappear, sparking their drinks with fucking drugs so they go act crazy around town and nobody believes them anymore. I don't know why the man in black would be like, hey, what you saw was real and you weren't supposed to see that. And then he just politely asks Harold Dahl, please go and tell everybody that your sighting of a drunk UFO puking white metallic slag was a work of fiction. Well, Tommy Lee, you don't have to worry about that because everybody with a working brain can figure that out for themselves. Also, according to the coffee shop version, the man in black then drove Dahl back home after their coffee date, and this is when Dahl discovers that his son with the broken arm was now missing. But good luck finding a missing persons poster or a missing child report on that, because they do not seem to exist. Also, Harold Dahl must have been like Jeremy Clarkson and just been like, oh no. Anyway, because he just kept doing his UFO shit anyway. Because then he and Fred Chrisman would go and contact Ray Palmer, the editor of the science fiction magazine. So, what a bunch of fucking bullshit. Anyways, as the story goes, Ray Palmer then contacted Kenneth Arnold. Now, if you're familiar with all of this UFO shit, you know who Kenneth Arnold is. He's basically the guy that came up with the term flying saucer. Just a few days after Dahl's donut puked white metallic slag on a dog, Kenneth Arnold was flying around Mount Rainier and he was looking around for some sort of military aircraft that had crashed out there because there was a reward for finding it. Now, while he was flying around out there, he apparently saw 9 flying saucers. He then came up with the term and it captivated the nation, and he is widely considered as the guy that started off the modern UFO era. Good for him. Now, according to this version of the story at least, Arnold was quite intrigued by Dahl's story, so he traveled to Tacoma, Washington to investigate it for himself. He then interviews Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman, he examines the white metallic slag, and in the end, he finds their story unconvincing. Imagine that. A guy who claimed he saw 9 flying saucers comes and tells you that he thinks your UFO story is bullshit. Amazing. Love it. The other version of the story says that Arnold tried to contact Chrisman, but Chrisman was now MIA. So Arnold then tries to contact Dahl, who then refuses to speak with him, presumably because he was threatened by the man in black. If that is indeed what happened, then the story technically ended right here. I have no idea if Kenneth Arnold even came out and spoke with these people, and the rest of the story was just made up after the fact by, magazines like Amazing Stories, for example. I genuinely have no idea why the story is this fucked. I wonder if there is actually a reason for this. But anyway, according to the story, I suppose, Kenneth Arnold must have found Fred Chrisman somewhere and somehow convinced Harold Dahl to speak with him, because apparently he interviewed both of these guys and ultimately suspected that their story was a hoax. However, he still thought that there could be something to it. Well, Kenneth Arnold obviously had an open mind. But since he was now the god of UFOs, he called in some experts to get their opinion. He then contacted Lieutenant Frank Brown and Captain William Davidson of the U.S. Army Air Forces, who were both stationed at Hamilton Field in California. Brown and Davidson then flew out to Tacoma, Washington, and spoke with Dahl and Chrisman and examined the metallic slag for themselves. Ultimately, they also thought that these two guys were talking bullshit, but apparently they decided to take some samples back home with them. Now, on August 1st, 1947, when Brown and Davidson left, they boarded a B-25 bomber which was heading back to California, but tragically, the B-25 would crash near Kelso, Washington, killing both Brown, Davidson, and another crew member. However, a fourth crew member was able to parachute to safety. Now, obviously, this crash made people think that the metallic slag samples that they took with them had something to do with it. But how exactly? Who knows? Probably through the power of people's imaginations. Some other people think that it wasn't the slag, but rather that some entity had sabotaged the plane to silence Brown and Davidson. And we'll pause right here to make fun of people who think that. If you recall, Brown and Davidson thought that this was all bullshit. So let me ask, who exactly was trying to silence them? The government couldn't have asked for better people because Brown and Davidson both thought that this was bullshit. So who was trying to silence them? The people who believed that this was genuine UFO vomit? How the fuck does this make any sense at all? And also, the only reason that the story has any notoriety whatsoever is because of this very real plane crash. So if it was the government that sabotaged the plane, or the CIA or FBI or whoever it is supposed to be that silenced Brown and Davidson, they made the dumbest single-digit IQ play ever, because in killing their own pilots and crashing their own plane, they inadvertently made the story even more famous. Once again, we're going to think about this, and we're going to ask ourselves, if the pilots got back to California and the government just said, well, we examined the slag, it just seems to be white, hard, calcified dog shit, do you not think that most people would have just immediately forgotten about this story? Of course they would have, because nothing happened. But now that there is a plane that crashed while carrying some UFO debris, there will always be people who believe that the plane crashed because of that slag. And you know, there are some people who think that the plan wasn't only to kill the pilots, but to destroy the evidence. Because that makes more sense. I don't know if you remember, but Kenneth Arnold saw his 9 flying saucers while flying around and looking for a crashed military aircraft. Was there slag on that military aircraft as well? Did we just forget for a second that sometimes planes crash? The official explanation of this plane crash, the B-25 bomber, is that it experienced engine failure. But I suppose, given the timing of the crash and the fact that they were supposedly carrying some mysterious cargo, this white metallic slag, the FBI did actually say, we should go and take a look at this shit for ourselves. So the FBI came out and they investigated both the UFO story and the plane crash. And they discovered something shocking. Something that you would have never expected if you didn't have a brain. They discovered that Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman crafted several different versions of the story for different newspapers and other media outlets, and that they contacted a variety of publications in the hope of building up their story through publicity to a point where they could make a profitable deal with Fantasy Magazine of Chicago, Illinois. So let me just ask, how does a hoaxed UFO story cause a plane crash? Obviously, it can't. But from there, it was easy mode for the FBI to determine that Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman's claims were a bunch of bullshit. Harold Dahl himself even stated that if questioned by the authorities, he was just going to say it was a hoax because he didn't want any further trouble over the matter. Now, to me and to most people, that tells us everything we need to know about this story. But if it's not good enough for you and you still think there might be a small chance that it's true, then we can keep going. Now, I don't know about you, but if an alien spaceship puked on my cat Misty, the first thing I would do is take her to the vet. Dead or alive, I would take her to the vet, because that way I could prove that there was some sort of weird metallic slag shit that killed my cat. Same thing goes for the kid. Why didn't Harold Dahl take his son to the hospital to have his injuries examined? He claims that his arm was broken by this shit. if he took his kid to the hospital with this metallic slag shit still on his arm, he would have the so-called holy grail of ufology, physical evidence that something did indeed happen. And surely, if an alien spaceship was puking white metallic slag, surely there would be some kind of chemical in there that is just not commonly found everywhere, and would again prove that something did indeed happen. For example, if you investigate a plane crash, you can find jet fuel. If you investigate a rocket blowing up on a launch pad, you can find rocket fuel. And if you investigate UFO stories, you can find bullshit. If this was true, surely there would be something in this white metallic slag that would be interesting. Now I'm gonna jump ahead a bit before we put the story out of its misery, because despite the fact that the FBI concluded that this entire story was a hoax, as well as the fact that both Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman both admitted themselves that it was a hoax, separately by the way, this story still gets retold all the time, and typically when retold, the person or people telling it omit the fact that Dahl and Chrisman actually said it was a hoax. But here's something interesting. The very debunked Majestic 12 documents also mention this Maury Island incident. Now, the Majestic 12 documents, by the way, are a series of reports which surfaced in about 1988 and claim to be classified briefings for President Eisenhower from a secret committee tasked with recovering extraterrestrial aircraft. Now, these documents are practically certainly complete fucking bullshit, and they've been debunked thoroughly. But in case there was any doubt, here's one example that pretty much proves that. The Majestic 12 documents claim that this white metallic slag shit came from a nuclear reactor, and that the evidence was then turned over to the CIA. How? Wasn't the evidence destroyed in the plane crash? Was that supposedly not the purpose of the plane crash, to destroy the evidence? Even though that is the stupidest fucking thing I think I've ever heard, because the government could just take the shit to Area 51, where no one will ever see it. So I don't understand what the purpose of destroying it would be. But obviously, Brown and Davidson didn't take every last remnant of the slag with them. There was still some slag left behind, which when analyzed later, was determined to be industrial waste, likely from a local smelter. So much for being one of the most compelling UFO stories ever. What a bunch of bullshit. And if you think, that's just what the government wants you to believe, then why in the blue flaming fucking hell did this guy not take his dog to the vet or to a scientist? The slag shit that killed the dog must have still been on the dog. He would have then had some physical proof of something. But despite all of the irrational decisions and the fact that both Fred Chrisman and Harold Dahl both admitted separately that this story was a complete hoax, fabricated to try to make some money, people still believe that this story really happened. Hey, and good for you. Oh, and by the way, they found Charles. 5 days after telling Kenneth Arnold that he wasn't going to speak with him, Charles apparently called his family from a motel in Montana with no recollection of how he got there. So, what in the blue hell happened there? Was Charles abducted by drunk aliens? Was Charles maybe drunk? Or was he maybe never missing? Who knows, and who gives a fucking shit? Because Harold Dahl later moved away from Tacoma, and until his death in 1982, he maintained that the Maury Island incident, one of the most compelling UFO stories ever told, was just all a load of complete and utter fucking bullshit.